For episode 7, I thought we'd change things up one last time. Tonight, I present you with something special. Again, I decided to make this a long one and tell multiple true stories. And what goodies I have in store for you. I'll let you decide which story to believe as real. So let me know in the comments, as well as if you have any stories you'd like told. But just a quick suggestion. Please, aside from liking and subscribing, be sure to click that little bell icon to receive notifications so that the next time I upload a creepy true story or any other videos, you get notified, because I have so much in store for you. So without further ado, let's begin. Walking home from work one night, I found something I wish I hadn't. I was 2 blocks from my apartment when I spotted a wallet on the sidewalk. Before you go getting all judgmental on me, I need you to understand I don't make a lot of money. I basically live on ramen noodles and hot dogs, so yeah, I took the wallet. Inside it was $500 in cash and a bank card. There was no ID and nothing to say where it had come from. I was only going to take the cash, but when I looked at the bank card, I noticed something that instantly freaked me out. It had my name on it. This had to be a joke. Maybe one of my friends were hiding somewhere, watching, waiting to jump out and scare me, but that didn't happen. When I got home, I called the 1-800 number on the card. When the automated response asked me for an access code, I tried the first thing that popped into my head, my birthday. And it worked. There was $17,000 in the account. I hung up the phone and sat there staring at the card, trying to wrap my mind around what this could be. I didn't know what to do. If I used the card, would that be stealing? After all, it was in my name, but there was no way this belonged to me. Taking the cash was easy. I mean, $500 would cover most of my rent, and that would be awesome, but the card was driving me nuts. The first person I called was my girlfriend, Amanda. When I told her what I had found, she came right over. "Are you sure this isn't a prank?" She tried calling the number just like I did and got the same response. Holy crap, I think this might be real. There's only one way to find out. She picked up the phone and ordered a pizza using the card. It worked. 45 minutes later, we were sitting there eating and trying to figure out what to do next. "Ozzy, I think you should take the money. Let's be real, you probably won't get another chance like this ever. Take it and call it a blessing. You deserve this." I wanted to believe she was right. Hell, I needed to believe she was right. And in the end, despite my second thoughts, I took the money. I told myself I'd be responsible and only use it for the things I needed, like food or help paying bills, and for the first couple of days, that was exactly what I did. By the end of the week, I'd caught up all my bills and paid rent for the next 2 months. For the first time in a long time, my refrigerator was full of food and I was able to get a couple of things I really wanted. With the extra cash available, I would be able to save my checks and start planning ahead. Things were looking up. The following Monday, I went to work as usual. I'm a janitor in a small office building not far from where I live. That week was my turn to take the night shift. When I got there, Martin, my supervisor, was standing out front smoking a cigarette. "Hey Martin, how's it going?" He looked at me with his usual goofy grin and took a drag. "What's up, Oz?" "Oh, you know me. Brand new day, same old shit." There's a new client on the 3rd floor. They're gonna be here setting up for a while, so you'll have to save that one for last. Other than that, some jumbo killed the 1st floor restroom. It smells like something died in there. I've cleaned it twice and can't get the stink out. Just do me a favor. Before you leave, pour some more bleach in all the toilets. Maybe that'll help. Once Martin was gone, I got my stuff together and went up to the top floor. I like to start at the top and work my way down. That way, when I'm done, all I have to do is clock out when the next person comes in. I just finished collecting all the trash and wiping down the glass when I heard the elevator chimes go off. Stepping out into the hall, I looked to see who it was and caught a glimpse of a woman going into one of the offices. Since I typically don't do the night shift, I figured it was normal and went on with what I was doing. About 5 minutes later, I hear someone clearing their throat from behind me and turned around. Standing there, with her arms crossed, she gave me a hateful sneer. "I know it was you. Now give them back, or I'm calling the police." "Excuse me, what are you talking about, ma'am?" She looked me over and pulled the phone from her pocket. "I know you took the checks off my desk. Now give them back, or I'm calling the authorities right now." Stepping back, I was starting to get a little pissed off. "Listen, lady, I don't know what your problem is, but I haven't been in your office and I'm not a thief. Fuck off. I've got work to do." The look on her face was priceless. And to be honest, I don't know what came over me, but it felt great. In hindsight, I probably could have handled that a lot better. Too little too late, I guess. Within 15 minutes, the cops were there. I'm not sure how it happened, but the check she was talking about turned up in my push cart with the trash. I almost lost my job and narrowly avoided going to jail, but when it was all said and done, I went on with my night. Moving on to my next floor, I wish that lady would get run over by a bus. As a matter of fact, I spent the rest of the night coming up with the most heinous deaths I could imagine for a person. I swear, by the time I clocked out, I'd come up with a long list of ways for her to die. And while it was all in my mind, it made me feel better about the whole situation. The next night, when I made it to work, Martin was out front, as usual. Only there was no goofy grin, just a somber expression that kind of worried me. "Hey, Oz, before you go in there, I just thought I'd tell you what happened. Miss Preston, the lady you had the problem with last night, she was found dead in her home this morning. It's all over the news. They're saying someone broke in and tortured her for hours before killing her. Just thought I'd give you the heads up in case the cops come by." As he finished talking, I received an alert to my phone. Pulling it out, I saw it was from the bank. $20,000 had just been deposited into my account. My jaw dropped. Holy shit. I'm sorry, Martin. I need to make a phone call. Would you mind covering me for a while? I have to handle something real quick. He agreed, and I stepped away to call Amanda. "Babe, you're not gonna believe what just happened. More money just hit the account, and it's a lot. What should I do?" By the sound of her voice, I could tell she had been asleep when I called, but when I told her how much money it was, she hit the roof. "Oh my God, well, I don't know. Can you find out who's depositing the money?" It was a great idea. I honestly don't know why I hadn't thought to do it before. I told her I would call her back and did exactly that. The money was coming from a company called SP United. Nothing about it seemed familiar. I didn't have a lot of time to waste, so I called Amanda back and asked her to Google it and text me what she found out. After that, I was rushed inside to clock in and got right to work. The night was flying by. Before I knew it, I was on the 3rd floor. As I stepped out of the elevator, I ran into a guy I'd never seen in the building before. He was younger looking, mid-30s I'd guess, tall and slim with short dark hair. He was dressed pretty much like most of the people that work there, so I didn't think too much about it. He looked at me for a second with a sort of blank expression on his face, then smiled. "Good evening. How's it going tonight, buddy?" Almost smiling to myself, pulling my cart behind me, I told him I was doing great. Every day's a good day when you're looking forward to tomorrow. Slick, right? That's one of those random lines of bullshit you spit out to the customer to keep them smiling. Chuckling to himself, he picked up on my game, stopped and shook his head. "You're pretty good at that. What are you doing here?" This is where my night took a left turn. I wasn't looking to have a random heartfelt conversation with a stranger, but he hit me with such a sincere tone of voice I almost regretted saying anything at all. The conversation rolled on for a few minutes, and at the end of it, his smile faded. That blank stare crept in, looking around the office for a moment. He paused and smiled. "Don't get stuck here. If you have an opportunity, take it. Don't blink. Don't think, just take it. You never know when it might come again." I, for one, could appreciate his game. It was strong and delivered like a pro. The problem was it felt like he meant it, and something about that look on his face gave me a sick feeling. I didn't realize he hadn't introduced himself until the elevator doors slid shut and he was gone. After that, my night slowed down. It felt like time literally stopped at one point, and no matter what I did, things wouldn't pick up. When I finally finished and clocked out, it felt like I'd been there for days. I couldn't wait to get home. I was close to halfway there when I checked my phone. Amanda had sent me a link. There wasn't much to look at, just the name of the company, a phone number, and an address. No pictures. No Bio Zero information. I put my phone away and planned on calling when I got in. But before I could get there, she called me. "Hey, Ozzy, there's a package here for you from SP. Do you want me to open it?" I hesitated for a second. How did they have her address? "No, don't open it. Just throw it away, whatever it is, I don't want it." She laughed and told me she would, but I know her. The second we got off the phone, she would open it anyway, and throw it away after. Once I got home and cleaned myself up, I called her back. She didn't pick up. I didn't want to jump to any conclusions, so I waited for a while, then tried again. This time, she answered. She sounded like something was wrong. Her voice was trembling, and she was stammering through her words. There was an odd ringing sound in the background as she sobbed. "I love you." And the line went dead. Leaping off my couch, I tried calling over and over and kept getting a busy signal. I hung up and called the police. The second I got off the line with them, I threw on my shoes and ran out of my apartment. Amanda lives 12 blocks away, and I ran as fast as I could all the way there. Okay, I'm lying. I made it through 2 or 3 blocks before that run turned into a jog, but I did jog most of the way. Anyway, when I got there, she was gone. I don't mean gone as in dead, she just wasn't there. The police told me the door was open when they arrived and no one was home. Her phone was on the kitchen counter, along with her keys. There was no blood and no signs of a struggle. It looked like she just walked away. They found her dismembered body in the park the next morning. 5 minutes after I got the call, I got an alert from my bank. Another $20,000 had been deposited into my account. I didn't leave my apartment for days after that. I called out and used up all of my vacation time at work. I was heartbroken. I couldn't function. I felt like my life was over. I couldn't even tell you what day it was anymore. I sulked around in my shitty little apartment until I went stir-crazy and then had to get out. I called Martin and told him I was coming back to work a little early, and he was happy to hear it. When I got to work, I stayed to myself and muddled through the day. When I got to the 3rd floor, it was closed for remodeling. I was actually a little happy about it, because that meant there was one less floor to deal with. Before long, I was on the 1st floor, finishing up. The second I touched the restroom door, I was hit by a smell that made my stomach turn. When I got inside, the smell was so heavy, I wanted to puke, but it looked clean. I checked everywhere, but I couldn't figure out where that smell was coming from. After bleach bombing the toilets and cleaning the trash, I double-checked everything and got ready to walk out. I was washing my hands in the sink when I heard a toilet flush. I knew for a fact no one was in there. I had checked all the stalls twice, but nonetheless, the guy from the 3rd floor stepped out of one of the stalls. I watched his reflection in the mirror for a second, then turned to face him, and there was no one there. I stood there rubbing my eyes, thinking I was losing my mind. Shaking my head, I grabbed the trash and turned to walk out. As I did, I heard his voice. "Don't get stuck here." I didn't look back. Once the 1st floor was clear, I clocked out and stood outside, waiting on the next shift to come in. After a few minutes, Martin walked up with his usual smile and offered me a cigarette. "I don't smoke, Martin. You know that." He smiled and lit one up. "I know. Just thought I'd ask. Sorry to hear about Amanda. Have the police found anything out yet?" I didn't want to talk about it. The conversation went back and forth for a while until the night shift showed up and I headed home. On the way, I stopped on 5th Street, a little sandwich shop that makes the best roast beef ever. I was sitting in a corner booth, eating and watching the traffic when a group of businessmen strolled in laughing and talking. Finishing up my meal, I got up from the table and left a tip before I started to walk out. As I passed by their table, I felt like they were watching me, but I shook it off and stepped out onto the sidewalk. The sun was setting, and the day was done. I couldn't help but think of all the times Amanda and I would sit out on the roof and watch the night roll in. Lost in thought, I strolled along, not really paying attention, and bumped into some random guy. "Watch where you're going, asshole. You almost made me drop my bags," he snapped at me. As I stepped back, "Sorry about that, man. My fault. It was an accident." I could tell by the look on his face he wasn't done. "I should fuck you up. You're lucky I'm with my girl." He shoved me and walked away with a redhead I hadn't paid attention to at the time. When I got home, I couldn't bring myself to go inside, so I sat on the stairs for a while, going through Facebook on my phone. I was just about to go inside when I started hearing sirens. Living in the city, I'd gotten used to it, but there was something about this time that felt different. Flashing lights lit the street as an ambulance came roaring by, headed in the direction I had just come from. Looking towards the end of the block, I could see people running. Curiosity got the best of me. I jogged down to the corner to see what was going on. From where I was standing, I couldn't see much, and at that point I was starting to lose interest. Whatever it was, it didn't involve me, and as I turned to head home, I got another notification from the bank. $5,000 had just been deposited into my account. When I finally made it to my apartment, I tried calling SP United, but all I got was an automated response that didn't help me at all. Looking up the address, I realized it was here in the city. Googling the location, I found out it was on the other side of town, and I made plans to go there in the morning. When I woke up the next day and clicked on the news, I saw there had been an accident involving 2 pedestrians and a city bus. It was the guy from the sidewalk and his girl. They hadn't been killed, but one of them was in serious condition, and the other escaped with minimum injuries. I know, I probably should have made the connection before then, but with everything happening so fast, I hadn't put it all together. Once I was dressed, I called an Uber and headed for SP United. When I got there, the building was closed. There was a note on the door that read, "We're moving to a new location. Sorry for the inconvenience. Our office should be open for business soon. For information, call 1-800-777-9311. I set up another ride and had them take me to Amanda's apartment. I still had a key, and her family hadn't come down to clean her place out yet, so I figured I'd grab a few things to remind me of her. When I got there, it was hard to go inside. The place still smelled like her, and every second I spent in there felt worse than the last. I was sitting in her living room floor going through some old pictures when my phone rang. It was Martin. "Hey, Oz, hope I didn't catch you at a bad time. I need you to cover a shift. I hate to ask, but I could really use a hand tonight." I wanted to say no, but Martin had always been fair with me and given me a chance when no one else would, so I agreed to cover the shift. When I got there later that night, I could tell something was wrong. Martin was on the phone arguing with someone. I'd never seen him angry before. He yelled and cursed into the phone, finally hanging up when he noticed me walking up. "Thank you for this, Oz. I don't know what I'd do without you." Something about the look in his eye bothered me. As long as I've known the guy, he'd never seemed like an aggressive person, but in that moment, I saw something dark and unsettling. "Everything okay? What's got you all worked up?" Putting on a fake smile, shaking his head, he walked away. I tried to put it out of my mind and headed inside to get started. When I got to the 5th floor, most of the lights were off and the furniture was covered in plastic. Looking around, there wasn't much to clean. I gathered up what little trash there was and checked the restrooms and break rooms. I was finishing up when the elevator chimes sounded. Looking down the hall, I spotted Martin standing in the center of the hall. "Hey Martin, what's up? What are you doing here?" He didn't answer. Instead, he came rushing in my direction. As he got closer, I could see he was carrying a knife. Shoving my cart towards him, I bolted in the opposite direction and headed for the stairwell. When I slammed into the door, it wouldn't open. Sticking around, asking stupid questions like "Why are you doing this?" is how people get killed. So I bolted down the hall and looked for something I could use to defend myself. The first office I came to didn't have much in it. The closest thing to me was an office chair, so I grabbed it just as Martin came running around the corner and stopped. "I'm sorry, Oz, but I don't have a choice. I need this money." He lunged at me, swinging the knife. For what it's worth, the chair did better than I thought it would. His first few swipes were pretty much deflected by the wheels, but Martin is a lot bigger than I am. He swatted the chair away and brought the knife down, sinking it into my shoulder. I screamed, "Fuck!" and snapped back out of reflex, with the blade sticking out of me. I felt an ice-cold pain shooting through my body, and my left arm went numb as Martin charged. He slammed into me, and we tumbled over the desk, landing on the floor. All I kept thinking was, this guy's going to kill me. I could feel his hands around my neck and hear him breathing. My ears were ringing, and my vision started to blur. I felt something solid, a tape dispenser, brush against my right hand. With no time to think, I grabbed it and slammed it into the side of Martin's head as hard as I could. I felt his grip slip away as I kept cracking him across the head until he released me and slumped on top of me, bleeding. It took a lot to roll him off of me and stand up. I was losing a lot of blood, and it was getting harder to focus. Stumbling out into the hall, I took a step towards the elevators, and as I got closer, I heard footsteps rushing up behind me. I spun around in time to see Martin swing a computer monitor and smash it over my head. Staggering back, I hit the wall and dropped into a sitting position against it. Somehow the impact of the monitor knocked the blade free from my shoulder. It was lying on the floor, just out of reach, as Martin lumbered towards me. Leaning forward, I grabbed the knife and drove it into his neck as he reached out to grab me. Letting out a gurgling yelp, Martin staggered back, clawing at the hole in his throat, then collapsed. I sat there for a second in shock. I couldn't move. Looking around the lobby, I spotted something on the floor near Martin's body. A wallet. Getting up slowly, I stepped over and picked it up. Inside was a little cash and a bank card, just like the one I'd found, but with Martin's name on it. Holy shit! Moving as fast as I could, I got to the elevator and called the police. Once I was out of the building, I collapsed. When I came to, I was being loaded into an ambulance. Police were all over the street, and as I looked around, I spotted the guy from the third floor talking to an officer. For a second, I could have sworn I saw him smirk at me. And as the door shut, my phone vibrated in my pocket. I hope you've enjoyed that story. It comes from Reddit user and subscriber Leon Hamilton. So please do me a favor and support him like he did me by checking out some more of his work with his Reddit name on screen now. I'd also like to personally thank him for providing some of the sketches he created to better your viewing pleasure. Now, on to the next story. This next story comes from a friend named Jerry. She starts by thanking me for taking the time to listen to her experience. However, we thank her for sharing it. This took place probably in the late 70s, early 80s. I was about 10 or 11 years old, and I lived in a town in Ohio called Woodsfield. I was friends with a girl named Stacy then, and Stacy lived just a few blocks up the road from me. We played at Stacy's often, so naturally, we'd occasionally talk about the old abandoned house that sat hauntingly across the street from Stacy's home. It was a big house, really big, and we were always curious about it. For one thing, there was like a small moat that had been dug out around the house. I don't know for what reasons, but I assumed to keep trespassers off the property. But we were young, and the rumors from the other kids in the neighborhood piqued our interest. So it didn't take long for us to locate and place a few wooden boards across the encumbrance to further indulge our curiosity. We played in and around the house, especially in the yard, for several weeks. Once we had the grit to venture inside the vacant house, it didn't take long for us to realize that the guts were just as strange as the veneer that stood watching us play and grow for so many years. Like performing an autopsy on a vagrant, imagine a body dirty and aged, abused and broken, only to cut open the cadaver to find what's underneath to be clean, intact, and working. That's exactly what it was like on the inside of this broken home. Not only did it look like whoever had abandoned the residence did so in a hurry, but left it so untouched that the electric was still working. This gives weight to the saying, "Don't judge a book by its cover," because behind this tattered cover lay in a home with furniture and appliances, personal items, and even a working phone. But you must understand, nobody, and I mean nobody, had lived in that house for years. Untouched, completely decorated, this house stood as a perfect time capsule for us to explore. For the most part, I'd say the contents within the home were overall normal. However, one day, we went in there. Something odd eventually did reveal itself. The item I speak of was this huge robot. I know how that sounds. It sounds ridiculous, but remember, this was the late 70s and early 80s. The ideas of the future, as well as advancement in technology, was on the rise, as well as custom robotics. I mean, during those times they didn't have Bluetooth, nor did they clean your home or play your favorite playlist. But they were mechanical, and many functioned on a very simplistic basis. This robot from the waist up was very human-like as far as design and physiology. For example, it had arms, looked to move, as well as articulation in the head. However, waist down, it was designed much differently than a human. The bottom half of the robot was equipped with caterpillar-like tracks you would normally see on some kind of construction equipment or a tank. However, the tracks were smoothed down as if the rubber had been worn away. You know, it kinda gave us an eerie feeling. It was never powered on, and we never seen it light up or anything like that. But since the day we discovered the creation, we would go back and it would always be in a different room. We initially thought that Stacy's brother Scott was messing with us, because we did tell Scott about it, and we just assumed that he was messing with us. You know, older brother and all. Well, anyway, one day we went back inside the house and it was gone. I mean, we couldn't find it anywhere. It was like a game of hide and seek with some large metal doll. But it didn't take long for us to be startled by the sound of something rolling across the wooden floor, upstairs, above us. We were without words, to say the least, and frightened is an understatement. But for some reason, we still decided to investigate the culprit behind the sound. At this point, you probably already realize what made the sound. But to us girls, that just didn't make sense. The lifeless creation had never operated in front of us. It had never moved in front of us. Before that point, we had assumed it had been moved, but we did not believe that it had moved on its own. Though scared, I suppose, we thought we'd catch Scott or someone in the act. So we ran up the stairs, and there, standing upright in the back corner of a room, was the robot. Upstairs now. A place Scott was not. In fact, no one was in the house aside from me and Stacy, and that machine. An odd creation that had always been on the bottom floor. There was no way for it to get up the stairs, and after all, it was large and its lifeless body was much too heavy for anybody to just carry up. It was just really strange. Of course, we didn't stay long after we pieced it all together. In fact, we went flying out of the house and ran back across the street. We still approached Scott about it and told him what we had seen, but he didn't believe us. He did, however, decide to go over to see for himself if the robot was in fact on the second floor. He did this because, like I said, it was large, and Stacy and I didn't have the strength to even drag such weight up a flight of stairs. So, accompanying him, we followed. And I should add that this all happened on the same day. Almost immediately, I'd say. Unfortunately, Scott's investigation proved pointless. I guess Scott just assumed we were two silly little girls making up wild stories to tell other children, since when we stepped back inside the house, there, on the bottom floor, stood the robot, like it always had, lifeless. A couple months after that, the house did get torn down and nothing was ever said about them finding anything strange inside. Every day during its demolition, we would stare out of Stacy's window and watch the workers remove items and debris from the home as they tore it down. And never once did we see the robot get pulled from the rubble. I don't know what to make of it, even now. All these years later, I am still bewildered. Has anyone experienced anything like this? Perhaps there is some explanation for it, but as far as we know, it was like there was some sort of ghost in the machine. When I was much younger, I used to travel to Florida to visit family. This one time was special because I remember we had traveled by train from DC to Tampa. Nothing unusual happened during the trip down, nor did anything peculiar happen while visiting. However, on the way back to DC, I had met a young girl whom I talked to for most of the train ride home. Needless to say, we bonded quite a bit since we were the only kids on the train, aside from the girl's younger sister. And although this encounter wasn't strange in the moment, it was what would happen later in time that made this chance occurrence odd. Anyway, me and this young girl had a lot in common. We decided to ask our parents if we could exchange information to later keep in touch with one another. Her name was Hannah. I remember it wasn't long after meeting her, I say a month or so, that I had reached out to try and get in touch with Hannah. It was then that her parents would eventually return my call, only to tell me that Hannah had passed away. Sadly, she died while in a church. Apparently, a tornado had touched down, and the place of worship in which many sought refuge had been in the Twister's path. The strange thing about it was, the night before I had received the call informing me of Hannah's passing, I had thought I had dreamt of her visiting me in bed. I recall I was lying next to my grandmother, and the room had been smoky. Hovering above us was Hannah, waving. My grandmother would later corroborate this spectral visit, recounting not only the sudden change in atmosphere within the room, but the vision of Hannah over top of the bed, waving. I have always had an eye for the things most people couldn't see. So to see Hannah that night, and to learn that my grandmother had also seen her, was confirmation that my friend was letting me know that it was going to be okay. My third eye opened at a very early age for me. One of my first encounters happened while I was very young, I'd say around 5 years old. Well, me and my family lived in a mansion in Maryland. I mean, this place had all kinds of little nooks and crannies and doors that seemed to lead to nowhere. So as a young kid, the house was very strange to me. My family and I lived there for many years during my youth, but I'd say the strangest part about that house was the basement. There was an old bar down there in the basement, and even though we didn't drink, it was the hangout for all the kids in the family. Anyway, one morning I had awoken after having a dream that I fell down the spiral staircase from the top floor to the bottom, leading to the basement. Now, when I woke from that dream, I noticed that I was standing at the bottom of the spiral staircase, in the basement. But I hadn't fallen. I don't know what happened. I suppose I had walked down to the basement, as I had no cuts or bruising of any kind. Once aware of what had happened, I heard a noise come from the storage room in the basement. Being a curious child, I decided to go and look to see what was making the noise. Now, the storage room was not the room that had the bar in it where the kids would play. In fact, this room was one that I had never really explored, as the lights didn't always seem to work. But still, after hearing this unexplainable noise, I decided to check it out. And of course, the lights didn't work then either. I never really did find out what it was that had been making the noise. But whatever it was, it had led me to a false wall within the storage room. And it was then that I had noticed someone standing near me, beside the false wall. At first, I wasn't frightened, as the house was filled with many people. We had a big family, and we all lived in a gigantic house. All my aunts and uncles and cousins, so to see someone wasn't strange, but light was limited. And all I could really seem to notice feature-wise was the white dress the figure had been wearing. Unsure who it was, I said hello. The woman then turned and suddenly was gone. I remember running out of the room and up the stairs, scared out of my mind. I just ran with every ounce of energy my little body could produce. It felt like it took forever to get from the basement to the top floor where my grandparents had slept. In fact, they were still asleep, so I shook them, yelling about what I had just seen. Once awake, the two of them followed me below with flashlights, and I showed them the false wall I had found. They had never known about it either. I know that sounds odd, but it was the storage room. We had moved a lot of stuff into that room, so many boxes hid many of the walls. And as I've stated, the electric never really worked there. My grandparents began moving some of the boxes out front of the false wall, until finally we were able to see what was behind it. Behind that false wall was a pillow and a blanket and some other odd trinkets. as incredible of a find this was, nobody in the house believed me about the person I had seen or the noises I had heard. But they did acknowledge that there was something very strange about the contents behind the wall. I mean, why would these things be here? Why would a pillow and blanket be stored in such an enclosed space inside such a big house? It wasn't long after discovering this that my grandparents decided to tear down the false wall and open it up a bit. It was while doing this that my grandparents had found something tucked into the wall inside that little area. What they found tucked away was a white dress. Now, my grandparents didn't find any bones or anything like that. There was nothing to suggest that any human remains would be found. However, I know it in my bones that had they went just a little deeper, that discovery may have been made. This next subscriber submission comes from a friend of mine named Stephanie. Much like the story before, this one will recount much of what happened while living in her childhood home. Once again, I will tell it like I was told and leave it up to you to decide what to believe. This will be the last of the 4 subscriber submissions, but for this last one, I suggest you leave the hallway light on, just in case someone is on the other side. So without further ado, let's begin. My family and I moved into a house when I was about 5 years old back in 1979. The house was built in 1949, so although we were not the first family to live in this house, we did for quite a while remain in the house until we later sold it. But until that happened, many strange things took place. For starters, one of the first things told to me by my sister, who is 9 years my elder, is that after we first moved into the house, there was a girl around my sister's age, which was roughly 14, 15, who had approached my sister while she was playing outside. The girl had introduced herself by asking a simple question. The girl asked, "Are you moving into this house?" My sister responded by saying, "Well, yes, we've already moved in." The girl then says, "Well, I just wanted to tell you that you need to leave the house. That house is not good. The house is haunted," the girl claimed. The girl then turned and left, never saying anything further and never being seen again by my sister, nor by anyone she had described her likeness to. She definitely wasn't a current neighborhood kid. But why would she say this? How could she know this? Had she lived there previously, and who was she? We never knew, as after that brief encounter, the girl disappeared. For as far back as I can remember, I've always felt uncomfortable in the house. I've always got the feeling that someone was watching me. It was like as if someone were behind you. Whatever sense you have that is responsible for it, you would just know. However, when I turned around, no one would be there. But I never stopped feeling that feeling, for that presence was always behind me. And like most people who have claimed to have paranormal experiences within their home, electronics would constantly malfunction. Things like lights would turn on and off, the TV would turn on and off, and even change channels. The vacuum cleaner would even come on. There were moments that the radio would turn on. I would walk over and shut it off and sit back down, only to have the thing turn back on moments later. Everything powered by electricity seemed to have acted up at one point or another. And this happened quite often. Various doorknobs would click and shake, turning as if someone were on the other side attempting to open the door, even when no one was clearly on the other side. But even with all that activity, the worst of it all seemed to be the persistent footsteps that were heard by everyone in the house. My mother would wake me and my sister up quite often to ask us if we were just in the kitchen or some other room, for example, claiming to have heard someone walking around but finding us tucked away fast asleep. You could say that startled her as well as us. My mother would also hear her name being called. I know this because she would approach me and my sister, asking us if we had just called her. Of course, when this would happen, we never had. For all the previous examples that I have provided, you could say that, for the most part, it was rather harmless. But more strange things did begin to take place, things that were a bit more intense than a few light flickers and floor creaks. If you remember, my sister is much older than me, and while in her teenage years would tend to have a lot of friends over to stay the night. Being the younger sister, I was rarely included in their late night activities. Often I would try sneaking up the stairs to her room to hopefully be let in. One night, for my sister's birthday, she had a slumber party and had a bunch of girls stay over, and again, I was left downstairs, unable to participate. So naturally, I began making my way up the dark staircase in an attempt to peek in and see what they were doing. About halfway up the steps, the light suddenly came on, and my sister and all her friends ran out of the room, knocking me down and basically trampling over me. My sister, when noticing me, grabbed me up and brought me down with them all to sit in the living room. They were all very quiet and just stared at each other. Later on, I would ask my sister what it was all about. I asked her, "Why did your friends run over me like that on the stairs? Why did you grab me and sit me downstairs with all of you to say nothing?" She then told me that they had been in her room playing a game called Light as a Feather, Stiff as a Board. She started explaining that the rules of the game require all participating to place their hands underneath the subject and chant "Light as a feather, stiff as a board" several times over. To make a long story short, the reason for why they all freaked out and ran down the steps was due to the fact that they were successful in the game. Apparently, the girl had indeed levitated a few inches off of the ground, and even after they let go, aside from the unexplainable sounds and the unusual behavior of random unmanned electronic devices around the house, the first time I had seen something was while I was outside of the house, while I was about 9 or 10 years old. I remember roller skating in the street out front, but even out there, I started getting the feeling of being watched. I looked around, but like in the house, nothing. That is, until my gaze landed on the half-circle window that was on the second floor of the house. There, standing in the window, looked to be a cloaked figure watching me the entire time I was playing. When my eyes met that dark, cloaked figure, I froze. And by froze, I mean I was paralyzed. I wasn't able to move. I stood there for an unknown amount of time, exchanging gazes at whoever or whatever was on the second floor. I wanted to move. In fact, I wanted to scream, but when I tried to yell, nothing would come out. It was like all voluntary movement had become overtaken by the sight of this figure. I don't remember the exact moment that the paralyzing grip had released me, But I know as soon as it did, I ran into the house and straight into the kitchen, where my father at the time was writing out his bills, and my mother was cooking. Neither claimed to be upstairs at all. When I got older, I did begin researching this experience, and as strange as it sounds, you'd be surprised how many people have claimed to see cloaked figures. And as dark as that cloaked figure was, things soon got a lot darker. All throughout the time I lived in that house, when I would go to sleep at night, there were times I wasn't sure if I were half asleep or aware of what was happening, but I could feel multiple entities standing around me, looking down at me, almost suffocating me. It felt as if they were there to feed off of me, as if their only purpose of residing there was to drain me of what they could. This would cause me to have a loss of energy and wake with dreadful feelings. Soon, night sweats became persistent. I began waking up at the same time every night, just a little past 3 a.m., having just felt the presence of multiple dark entities. A short while after this began, my mother started leaving the hallway light on for me, so that way, light could comfort me through the crack in my door. This seemed to help until one particular night, I had awakened just a little past 3 a.m., like normal, and noticed that the door was shut. It was either that or the light was off, because no light was coming through the crack that was usually present. I lay examining the door, trying to piece together the events that could possibly have led to this shift in normalcy. Was the light still on, and my mother for some reason shut the door? Or was my door still open and my mother just turned off the light? It was then that I realized neither was the case. In fact, not only was the light still on, but the door was still ajar. The sudden absence of light persisted by the eclipse of an unknown entity standing on the other side, blocking the light while looking in. This realization became knowledge when the figure moved, allowing the light to peer through once again. This would happen time and time again, sometimes moving rather quickly as if a flash of darkness had zipped by. Since the house was old, there was a floor furnace in the hallway, so for someone to have traveled left to right down the hallway so quickly, the sound would have awoken the house. But when this happened, no noise was emitted. No furnace shaking, just a tall shadow from bottom to top flying by. It were as if darkness itself consumed just a moment in time, quickly strobing the light that normally would flood in. It would blacken the entire opening for the brief moment it passed by, and occasionally while stopping entirely to look in at me. This next odd occurrence took place while my mother was in her bathroom, in the master bedroom, getting ready for work. My mother was an LPN and happened to work at the hospital. This particular morning, I recall her running out of her bathroom hysterically, crying and babbling about something I couldn't make sense of. It was such a sudden and out-of-place interjection of unintelligible emotion. At first, I began to laugh, thinking my mother was messing with me or something. But it didn't take long for me to realize that my mother's panicked state was legitimate. It took a few moments for her to calm down. It was strange because for the first few moments, all she kept repeating was, "My head is gone." Finally, once she'd calmed down, she had told me that while she was doing her hair in the mirror, her head had been removed. She was standing there, able to look with her eyes into a mirror that reflected everything in the room, including herself, sans her own head. for that was no longer attached to her body. I was clearly no longer laughing as I realized whatever dark force I had been seeing was no longer focusing all of its attention on me. Shortly after this, I recall my parents had went out one night and my sister was left to watch me. At this point, I was sleeping on the couch instead of my own room. My sister's friend had also been staying the night that evening, and I recall waking up to my sister shaking me sternly, telling me that we needed to leave right now. Not asking any questions until outside, as we hid behind a bush, I asked my sister, "What's going on? Is the house on fire?" My sister shook her head and stared up at the big half-circle window on the second floor and said, "No, but there's someone in the house." She had told me that her and her friend noticed that all the attic accesses had been opened, and they could hear someone walking down the hallway. My sister's friend's father had been a police officer, so she called him and asked him to check out the house. He came by and said that the house was clear, of course. Strangely, he also admitted that all of the attic doors were closed. My sister and her friend had gone to the library to dig up articles on the house to see if they could find anything that might give a clue as to what we were all experiencing. They did find something, but it still didn't explain everything that was going on. Like, apparently the previous owner was a man who was unexpectedly left to protect his home during a break-in. I'll admit that I don't fully remember all the details, as it was my sister who had looked into the house's history. But I do recall her telling me that the night the home was burglarized, both the homeowner and the intruder were shot. The part I have trouble remembering is which one of them died. Whichever one it was, apparently died on the stairwell. It got to a point when, after school, I would get home and would just sit outside waiting for my parents or sister to get home, so that way I didn't have to ever step foot into the house alone. Even then, while I sat on the porch waiting, I could hear movement within the house. Once I had reached my teenage years, I started telling my friends about all the things that I had experienced as a child, and some of the things that were still going on. My friends, of course, didn't believe me at first, so to prove them wrong, I decided to go downstairs into the closet and pull out the Ouija board my father had acquired at a yard sale many years ago. Me and my friends took it up to the same room. My sister and her friends had played that light as a feather, stiff as a board game in many years ago. And of course, we began asking questions. Sure, we wanted to scare another, so the questions we asked were those like, if there is a spirit here, are you behind this person? And the planchette would slowly move to no, and then it would pass to the next person, and that person would say, are you behind this person? And again, the planchette would slide over to no. This happened until the turn reached the person beside me, and they asked, are you behind Stephanie? That is when it finally hovered over to yes. Something you should know about this room is that the floor we sat on was carpeted, however, the walls were wood paneling. The panels acted as walls covering storage spaces which could be accessed by several small 3x3 doors along the wall. When the spirit claimed to have been behind me, a gust began rumbling through the hollow access behind the paneling, shaking its wooden veneer. till eventually pushing through the opening, driving a gust of wind neither me nor my friends could debunk or explain. And just like my sister and her friends, we immediately got up and ran down the stairs, trampling over another until we were outside. Needless to say, my friends didn't want to stay the night too often after that. Other odd things began happening, like windows opening and shutting by themselves, even while no one was home. Even while outside, I could see windows slowly opening and shutting with no one on the other side. My parents did eventually divorce. Later in my teenage years, I'd say I was about 16 years old when it was just me and my father living in the home at this point. Everyone else had moved out. I remember I was dating a boy who I'd sneak in while my father was asleep. My boyfriend would even sleep over sometimes, sleeping in the closet, just in case my father came in to check on me in the middle of the night. This worked, however. Some mornings I'd wake up and find a leg sticking out of my closet. My boyfriend happened to be 6'3" and about 225 pounds, so sleeping comfortably in a closet was never possible for him. It didn't take long for my boyfriend to ask me if he could spend the night in one of the spare rooms on the second floor. This idea was fine by me, as that floor was pretty much abandoned by our family. My father definitely didn't go up to the second floor anymore, and with everyone moved out of the house, he could sleep stretched out and still avoid my father. Well, he did stay the night, and he did sleep upstairs. But it was that first night which he stayed on the second floor that I was awoken by him, telling me that he was never going to sleep upstairs ever again. In fact, he would never step foot upstairs ever again, and to never ask him to sleep upstairs ever again. I asked him why this was, as he seemed to be fearless. I mean, he was a big guy. He didn't seem to be frightened by many things, but he never told me. And he refused to tell me what had happened while he was on the second floor. He just refused. Not long after that, I was trying to earn some money by babysitting the neighbors' 2 girls. They were younger and I was responsible for them, so I tried to appease them so they'd have a good time while staying in the house known to the neighborhood as the haunted house. But this title didn't seem to faze the 2 young girls. In fact, they kept bugging me to take them to the second floor and tell them a ghost story. Now, this gave me quite a bit of anxiety. My heart was racing, but because I wanted to make them happy, I obliged. We walked up the stairs and sat down in the room with the attic access. I began telling the girls a made-up ghost story. I can remember some of it because it started with me telling them about how there once was this babysitter who had been watching these 2 little girls. And these 2 little girls wanted to go into a room on the second floor to tell ghost stories. I know I probably threw in some other small details to go along with the story, but it was at this moment when I said, while the babysitter was telling the 2 little girls the story, I pointed my hand over to the storage access, which at that time had been taped up by my father. Continuing the story, I said, and that door right there swung open. And just as I said it, that door taped by my father swung open with force, smacking against the wall. I can't tell you how many times those stairs have been run down by frightened people. Those girls never wanted to come over again. My father and I eventually did move out of that house into a 2-bedroom, 1-story home. Sometimes I think about reaching out to those who have lived in the house after we sold it. I should also say that nothing paranormal has ever happened since leaving that house. I feel bad for passing the burden, but I must admit, relieved that my family is no longer tormented by whatever resides inside the walls. Please tell me in the comments which story you believe is fake and which are true. Since this episode was tracked right around Halloween, I decided to make this episode much longer for your listening pleasure. I'd like to thank the following for their submissions. So a thank you goes out to Stephanie, Jerry, Heidi, and Leon, as your contributions to this episode are the reasons why I'm able to do what I love. Please don't forget to check out Leon's Reddit page, which I have provided for you, and hopefully you can find links there that will lead you to some of his artwork, which I must say is incredible, some of which he provided for this episode. If you have any frightening stories of your own, please know that you can email me at oddandmacabre@gmail.com. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, and most importantly, stay afraid.